Today we're going to take a journey back in time to see ancient monasteries and ancient cultures in the middle of the Judean desert.
That's right, Yael. Today on Insights Israel in the Middle East, we learn the incredible story of the monks, the nuns, who held on to their faith in this land throughout history. The world we live in seems to be moving at an ever-increasing speed. There's always too much to do and not enough time to do it. And long ago, a group of men and women, who are called the Monastic Movement, decided they don't want to be part of that race. They're going to live a life of intentionality, of community, of contemplation, and of prayer. And they've done exactly that. That small movement started with men and women scattered throughout the deserts of the Middle East, has now left a very significant mark on this land. You can find impressive monasteries and monastic communities scattered throughout Israel and the neighboring countries. Today we're going deep into the story of the monastic movement in Israel.
Imagine how important it would be for a religious mother, right, to have her son sent to serve in the Holy Land.
Where is the monastic movement headed?
Well, our community is not disappearing. We are here, thanks God.
Here you have a movement of people who left behind money, not interested in any worldly possessions, and they don't even work within the system of breeding. Go explain that and how it remained so powerful in this world for about 2,000 years.
I'm on my way to meet Mirav Mack at the Monastery of St. John in the Wilderness. This ancient Franciscan monastery dates back to the Byzantine era and is dedicated to one of the spiritual fathers of all monks, St. John the Baptist.
Good to see you again, Mirav.
Good to see you.
It's been a while. We're here today talking about the monastic movement in the Holy Land, in the land of Israel. So maybe walk us through the basics of what the story of that movement is.
When we think of the monastic movement, I think first of all we need to talk about the holy men in general. If we go through the Bible, we find numerous people who would take themselves out of the society and try to bring salvation to the community around them. You have Moses going up to the mountain, praying on his own for the people of Israel. And Jesus does the same. He goes out on his own for 40 days. He deals with temptation. He deals with suffering. So you have Elijah. In the New Testament, you have St. John the Baptist. Standing here in St. John in the wilderness, this is a place where St. John actually escaped to and lived in. Initially, as a small baby, he was brought here by his parents to hide him away from the Roman soldiers.
So this is Herod the Great?
So this is Herod the Great. So just before the time of Christ, that's the first time that he comes here. And later on in life, he would come here, he'd rediscover this place as a grown-up.
As an adult, St. John the Baptist returned and retreated to the wilderness, living a simple and self-disciplined life, which later became a model for the monastic movement.
So say you're a hermit, what do you really need?
Solitude?
You'll have some water and you'll find a cave. And look at this, I mean, you can't date it, right? Because someone just dug into the rock. There is the cave. Look at that.
So this is what it would have looked like to be a hermit monk.
We're not far from Karim, the place where John the Baptist grew up. We can't say 100% that this is exactly the spot, but it has been believed to be the place since medieval time. This would be the prototype for monasticism. St. John the Baptist doesn't talk about monasticism. He doesn't call for monasticism. It comes a couple of hundreds of years later, in fact, when people begin to really move towards the desert, first on their own and then followed by a community.
Late 3rd century, Christianity already exists as a structure worldwide.
Absolutely.
But the Roman Empire is still not converted to Christianity.
Exactly. The emperors, they were pagans who thought, no, Christianity is dangerous. People were actually persecuted for their belief.
To death.
To death.
Yeah.
To death, to torture, and amongst them numerous of those monks who fled to the desert. Taking themselves away from all this suffering, they were able to really concentrate on the things that matter mostly to them: prayer, fasting, dealing with the biggest problems of the soul. The monastic movement, you could say, spreads all the way, of course, from Egypt, where it started, throughout the Judean desert, all the way to the sea, probably up the Jordan Valley. Small, tiny locations, a cave here, a cave there, but literally thousands. Very quickly, it became more institutionalized. So, rules. When do you fast? How much you pray? What to eat? What not to eat? And in order to join the movement, you need to train. And the whole idea of training becomes the essential of the monastic story.
Some of the oldest and most significant Judean desert monasteries that are still present and inhabited by monks today include the Monastery of St. George Koziba, the Monastery of Malsaba, the Monastery of St. Theodosius, and the Monastery of St. Gerasimus.
None of them are too far away from Jerusalem, and that's why they call themselves the Desert of Jerusalem. This dichotomy between the two sides of being outside the world or part of the world influencing it. And the church didn't always like it. They formed miracles. Yeah. And as soon as they formed miracles, everyone followed them. As soon as people follow them, they start giving them donations. So if you read St. Benedict, in the West, he didn't want his monasteries to be so wealthy. But by the 12th century, they had so much wealth. They were wealthier than some of the kings of Europe.
Most of us are familiar with the Benedictine and Franciscan monastic orders of Europe that came later. But what happened to all those original Judean desert monks?
The end of the desert monasticism, first of all, happened because of conquests. You can almost put, pinpoint 614, the Persian invade the region, shortly followed by the Islamic conquest of the land. All those pilgrims that came with a passion to live in the desert monasteries, that very much faded. From the desert, the ideas of monasticism went west. It captured Europe. They almost became directly the soldiers of the Pope.
The Knights Templar, a military monastic order, were famous for their participation in the Crusades in the Holy Land.
Monks are not priests, right? And they have their own rules.
Yeah, interesting.
One of the first things you know about priests is that they're not allowed to hold weapon no matter what happens. But monks are not under that same restriction. When Pope Urban II called for the crusade, he discovered that he had all these resources. The Knight Templar and the Knight Hospitallers became forces. They come back and they bring the monastic models into this land, first with the Crusades, but later on they stay, and until today you find various different monastic groups from the West who come and live in the Holy Land. And they're still active. They attract people who come from all over the world to experience life in the desert.
Welcome back. Mati, when we think about the writings of Yeshua, especially when he talks about prayers, Yeshua commands us or tells us to pray in the privacy of our room. And that brings me to the monastic movement. We see people that took the words of Yeshua and brought it to a very high extreme.
Well, I think it's fascinating to see that even today, people still connect with God in the same way they did here in this land. I mean, you mentioned Yeshua, Jesus. I mean, he does that same thing. He goes out to the desert, he spends time with God. John the Baptist, his contemporary, does the exact same thing. People who understand that to really connect with the Word of God on a spiritual, physical, psychological level, you have to set time aside. And I wish we had more of that in our life.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, we're busy, we have the cell phone, which never gives us a dull moment. We're always checking our cell phone again and again. Even in our quiet time, suddenly we hear the beeps of receiving another message, another text message, and so on. And like you said, I really believe that we're missing something on taking a time. Like you say, Yeshua went to the desert. John the Baptist, people looked at him as a weird, strange guy, but John the Baptist could get to the point of calling the people for repentance just because of his time, my opinion, quiet in the desert, being able to hear the voice of God. So let's watch together. Let's take the time to see what those people have to say to our life.
We have the great privilege to meet one of the most prominent and influential monks in the land, Patriarch Theophilus III of Jerusalem.
I'm the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, actually the Patriarch of Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem there is but one Patriarch. I grew up in here, and all my life has been committed to this institution here.
Theophilus III was born in Messina, Greece in 1952. When he was 8 years old, his family sent him to study with the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem.
Every mother, it's her wish, her dream, to have her son serve God, and especially to come to Jerusalem and to become a priest there, a monk there. So this is how I found myself here. I never thought, to be honest, that I would become a priest and eventually a patriarch, right? At the time when I came here, Jerusalem was divided, and it was under Jordanian rule. I grew up in our school here, St. Demetrius. Late Patriarch Benedictus asked us to join the brothers to become monks. We couldn't say no. And then, of course, you grow up, you have all sorts of existential questions, doubts about God, existence, all sorts of things, right? I won't study philosophy because I had all sorts of questions, right? And then late Patriarch Benedictus told me, no, you have to go and study theology.
Theophilus was officially enthroned as Patriarch of Jerusalem on November 22nd, 2005.
We are both a monastic order and a pastoral church. The brotherhood inherited what the Byzantines left behind, that is to say, churches, basilicas, monasteries, places of worship, and other institutions. Within the walls of the old city and outside, there are around 30 monasteries, small and big, which are property of the Patriarchate. And what has made this institution remain and sustain throughout the ages, it is because of its spiritual and religious mission. The purpose of the Patriarchate has been and continues to be to keep, guard, and maintain the holy places as places of prayer, of worship.
Despite his humility, Theophilus III holds an immense and crucial role in Jerusalem. Established in the mid-5th century, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate is one of the oldest churches in Christianity.
The challenges are endless, and this is what makes you to love Jerusalem, right? And you will never like to divorce with Jerusalem. One has to be honest and sincere. You can never say that in a very young age that you decide what to do. But what I can tell you is this, that I know from other monks also here. Once you find yourself in Jerusalem, and especially where you come as a young boy here, and you grow up in here, and you drink from the water of Jerusalem, forget about it, and you'll become a Jerusalemite.
With us today we have a good friend, Noam Hendring. Noam is one of the leaders of the Messianic Movement here in Israel. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
What does the Monastic Movement in Israel tells you?
Well, immediately you think about the different Christian monks and the like that you'll see in the old city of Jerusalem or other places. They could be Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox. Generally speaking, you're thinking of something that is very distinctively Christian in the church sense of the word.
But when we go towards the Dead Sea, we see Qumran and the settlement of the Essenes. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the first mention of the Essenes that we know of is from Josephus Flavius, and he had been involved and described the Essene movement, which apparently got started around 150 BCE, and was a movement of Jews who were very loyal to the Torah, to the law, concerned and zealous for the temple and the proper worship and the proper purity of the priesthood. And they saw a corruption during that period when Jonathan the Maccabee, the second of Mattathias' sons, who led the revolt against the Greeks, he basically took the high priesthood, even though he wasn't from the family of Zadok. This caused those who were zealous for the purity of the temple and the priesthood to withdraw in order to separate themselves totally from the impurities that were the norm in their viewpoint in Jerusalem and at the temple.
For those who are watching us, are believers all over the world, what can, if you want to say, what can they learn from the Essenes and this whole movement?
Well, first of all, let's just say, to speak, as we say, l'zchutam, on their behalf,
giving them the credit.
They were very zealous for the law of God, which they interpreted quite literally. They were highly critical of the Pharisees, whom they saw as rounding the corners of the law. But what happened with the Essenes is that they decided that they would separate themselves from the impurities by separating themselves from that whole world. We alone are the true Israel, the true remnant. Everyone else is lost if you haven't joined our group. So in a sense, the Essenes provide a good example of great piety and strictness according to loving the law of God. But on the other hand, they eliminated themselves as a real influential movement. So that at the end of the Jewish revolt, the Essene settlement in Qumran was overrun and disappeared. The Essenes disappeared from our world.
Let's go to the monastic movement in the Old Testament. Let's talk about Shimshon.
In the Torah, we already have a mention of what are called Nazirim, monks. In some cases, like Samson, he was set aside for his entire life to be devoted to the service of God. And this put certain restrictions on him. He was not to have any contact with the dead or dead bodies. He was not to have any contact with grape products, not just wine, not even grape juice. And he was, in his specific case, not to cut his hair for his entire life. Unfortunately, he compromised on a number of his oaths, and the results were somewhat disastrous for him.
Let's talk about the wilderness. The Midbar.
Yes, I think that especially in this area, and this was also true with those in Qumran, there was a desire to be separated from society. And therefore, the only way that you could really do that was to move outside of where there were settlements, outside where you were going to be constantly in contact with the world that you were trying to separate from. And so in Israel, that was the only place that you could really go where people didn't dwell all over the place. It was a way of being separate, and it was a way, I think also in terms of the wilderness, there was this sense of what God did with the people of Israel when he brought us out of Egypt, and he brought us into a wilderness to meet God. There it was at Sinai, and God revealed himself in a unique way. That was his isolating, taking Israel out of Egypt to the place, to a wilderness where he could meet them. And that became an archetype of God will meet his people who come out to him in order to meet God in the wilderness.
Noam Hendring, thank you very, very much. What a great honor.
Thank you, brother.
I'm on my way to the Emmaus Nicopolis Monastery. It is believed to be the location where Jesus first appeared to two disciples after his resurrection. I'm meeting Sister Esther, residing at the monastery alongside the members of the community who are pioneering a new direction for the monastic movement.
So Sister Esther, you know, there have been nuns and monks who've been coming to this land for almost 2,000 years now.
Yeah.
Some of them in this, you know, this very valley, they've been sitting in the same place. How long have you been a nun?
Well, I joined the community 24 years ago. I did my first vows in 2004, so it means 19 years I'm a nun. And when you do your final vows, it means you sign for life. Our community is a new community in the Catholic Church, but also a new kind of community. All the traditional communities or movements are only men or only women.
Separate, yeah.
And our community is born with couples and single persons. We are the first community entering into this new kind of status. We are like experimental.
You're a monastic startup.
Yeah.
Despite shifts from conventional monastic life that have occurred, the foundations of this community remain firmly rooted in prayer and contemplation.
What does the life in the day of someone in the community of Beatitudes look like?
We start the first prayer at 6:30. After breakfast, we have time until 8:30 to read and meditate on the Bible. And then we start working till 12. At 12:15, we have Holy Mass, followed by lunch. And at 6, we have Rosary prayer, either morning or afternoon. Each one take 1 hour to come to the chapel and pray in silence. And at 6:30, Vespers, which is end of term prayer.
Sounds incredibly structured.
We are here to pray for the country where we are, or the spiritual needs of our world. Well, the greatest rule of monastic life is from Saint Benedict. And he says, when the monk hears the bell, he has to stop what he is doing and come to the church, to do not be attached too much to the work. You need to do it your best and to become as professional as possible, but to do not become a slave of it, to always keep attachment first to God.
As part of her work, Esther's artistic talent extends to the realm of commissioned icons, where she expresses her deep connection with God through her paintings.
The book of the Bible contains the Word of God, and this is sacred. It means that we venerate the holy images the same way. I add sometimes elements that are not necessarily in traditional icons. Here, I put wounds of Jesus on the cross. And I think it's very important to keep them on the image to remind us that Jesus, who is fully God and fully man, also went to heaven with his humanity. With those wounds he suffered for us.
Esther's unwavering passion and dedicated pursuit of her vocation are truly inspiring, and her community serves as a testament to the lasting impact and relevance of the monastic tradition in our world today.
When you answer to your vocation, you enter in a fulfillment. If your vocation is to be married and raise children, when you find the woman or the man of your life, you feel something is fulfilled in you. And it is exactly the same to enter in a monastic life or any spiritual vocation. It doesn't mean that life is easier and that you don't face any difficulties, of course, like in any life, but you are fulfilled. When you have difficulties, when you have something hard happening, it's not a drama, because you are with God.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.